Have you ever met someone who believes the whole world should bend to their will? Someone who thinks their comfort, their view, their peace of mind matters more than anyone else's? Well, let me tell you about Karen, the neighbor who picked a fight she thought she could win, but ended up losing more than she ever imagined. It all started in a quiet neighborhood where people usually minded their own business. Most of the families are kept their yards neat, waved hello when they saw each other, and enjoyed the kind of peace you only find in small towns. But there was always one person who never seemed satisfied. That person was Karen. She carried herself like she owned not only her house, but also the entire street. Rules were her weapon, and complaints were her favorite pastime. Now, just across from Karen lived a family who owned a small piece of land. They weren't flashy, they didn't cause trouble, and they weren't loud. They were just regular folks who wanted to make the best of what they had. They decided to build a barn on their property. Not some massive city block barn. Just a simple, useful structure for storage and maybe a few animals. It was neat, clean, and built exactly within the rules of the community. But guess who wasn't happy? Yes, Karen. The moment she saw the barn taking shape, she felt her blood boil. Not because it was ugly, not because it broke the rules, not because it caused her any harm. She hated it because, in her words, it ruined my view. Imagine that. A barn, built on someone else's property, legally allowed and well-maintained. But Karen acted as if someone had stolen the sky from her. From that day on, Karen declared war. She began with her usual tactics. She filed complaints with the Homeowners Association, better known as the HOA. She sent emails. She made phone calls. She even showed up at meetings waving pictures of barn, demanding that action be taken. She claimed the barn blocked the sunlight, ruined the atmosphere, and destroyed the beauty of the neighborhood. She painted herself as a victim, as if her entire life had been turned upside down. At first, the HOA listened. They always did. Karen was loud, and sometimes the loudest voice in the room gets the most attention. But when they reviewed the situation, they realized the barn followed all the rules. The owners had the right permits. The structure was on their land. Nothing illegal was happening. But Karen wasn't going to stop. She wasn't the type to admit defeat. So she decided to make it personal. She began confronting her neighbors directly. She told them they were selfish, inconsiderate, and rude for daring put up something that interfered with her precious view. She would stand on the edge of their yard, glaring, making snide remarks loud enough to be heard. It was harassment disguised as concern. The family tried to stay calm. They explained politely that they had every right to build the barn. They reminded her that the HOA itself had approved it. But Karen didn't care about logic. She cared about control. And then she made her biggest mistake. She decided to take the matter to court. That's right. Karen actually filed a lawsuit claiming the barn damaged her property value, destroyed her enjoyment of her home, and caused her emotional distress. She wanted the court to order the barn torn down. She thought this would be her grand victory. She pictured herself standing tall, the judge agreeing with her, and her neighbors forced to apologize while dismantling their barn piece by piece. But here's the thing about going to court. Once you invite the law into your life, you can't control where it goes. The trial began with high drama. Karen came prepared with photographs of the barn, printed emails, and her long list of complaints. She cried in front of the judge, saying how she couldn't enjoy her morning coffee anymore because all she saw was that ugly structure. She said her peace of mind had been stolen. She even tried to claim that the barn was a safety hazard, though she had no proof. On the other side, the neighbors stayed calm. They showed their permits. They showed the HOA approval. They showed pictures proving the barn was neat and well kept. They didn't need to exaggerate or lie. The facts were already on their side. The judge listened carefully. He asked questions. He read documents. And then he noticed something Karen hadn't expected anyone to notice. It turned out that while Karen was busy complaining about her neighbor's barn, she had quietly broken a rule herself. Her home had several large windows facing directly into the neighbor's property. The HOA had strict privacy rules about how windows could be placed to avoid invading other people's yards. Karen's windows had been a problem for years, but no one had pushed the issue. Until now, the irony was impossible to ignore. Karen was accusing her neighbors of ruining her view, while she herself had windows that violated privacy laws and overlooked private property. When the judge pointed this out, the courtroom went silent. Karen's face turned red. She stuttered, trying to change the subject, but the judge wasn't interested in her drama anymore. He was interested in fairness. And so, the tables turned. The court ruled that the barn was completely legal. It would stay exactly where it was. But as for Karen, she was ordered to modify her house. Specifically, she had to remove or alter the windows that violated privacy rules. The very windows she used to spy on her neighbors, and the very windows she used to complain about her lost view, were the ones the court took away from her. Imagine the shock. Karen walked into court expecting her neighbors to lose their barn. Instead, she walked out losing her windows. Justice doesn't always come swiftly, but when it does, it's unforgettable. Karen's arrogance had backfired in the most dramatic way possible. She wanted to control others, but in the end, she lost control over her own home. The neighborhood watched the drama unfold like it was their favorite TV show. Some laughed quietly, others shook their heads, but everyone understood the lesson. You can only push people so far before the truth pushes back. Karen had wanted to make her neighbors' lives miserable. Instead, she made her own life harder. And that barn, it stood proudly on the property, a symbol of resilience against unnecessary complaints and bitter grudges. Now, you might think this was the end of the story, but trust me, it was just the beginning. Because once you cross a line with people, especially in a community where everyone knows everyone, the consequences ripple far beyond what you expect. Karen wasn't finished, and neither was the story. So stick around for what happens next, because if you think losing her windows was the end of Karen's downfall, you're in for a surprise. Backhand index pointing right. If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure you stay tuned for the second part. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a tale of justice served right where it belongs. Have you ever noticed how some people never learn their lesson, even after life teaches them the hard way? That was Karen. You would think losing her windows in court would have humbled her, or at least made her quiet down. But no, Karen was not built that way. Instead of accepting defeat, she doubled down. When the ruling came down, Karen stomped out of court fuming. Her pride was shattered. She had walked in expecting victory, but the humiliation of losing, and losing in front of the whole neighborhood, burned inside her like fire. To her, it wasn't just about the barn anymore. It was about control, about image, and about proving she was right, even when everyone could see she was wrong. The first few weeks after the court decision were the hardest for her. Contractors arrived at her house to remove or block the windows the judge had ordered covered. Neighbors watched with hidden smirks as the very eyes of Karen's home were sealed shut. The same window she used to glare out of, the same window she bragged gave her the best view in town, were gone. It was like watching karma being built brick by brick. But Karen couldn't accept it. She started spreading rumors. She told anyone who would listen that the judge was unfair, that her neighbors had connections, and that the whole system was against her. She twisted the story, painting herself as a victim of corruption. But the truth was clear. She had been caught breaking the very rules she tried to use against others. And the neighborhood wasn't by her excuses anymore. People began to avoid her. Where once some had politely listened to her complaints, now they crossed the street when they saw her coming. Parents warned their kids not to get too close to her yard. Neighbors whispered about how her obsession had destroyed her own peace. For Karen, isolation was the worst punishment of all. She thrived on attention, on being the loudest voice in the room. Now, she found herself alone, her words falling on deaf ears. But Karen wasn't finished. She decided if she couldn't win through the HOA, and if she couldn't win in court, she would win by making her neighbors' lives miserable in other ways. She started small, petty things that she thought would annoy them. She would leave trash near the property line. She would blast music at odd hours. She even tried to call in fake complaints to city inspectors, claiming the barn was unsafe. Each attempt backfired. The barn owners kept records, stayed polite, and reported her harassment. They were smarter than she gave them credit for. Instead of exploding in anger, they collected evidence. Every time Karen crossed a line, they added it to the growing pile of proof. Eventually, the HOA itself, an organization that had often tolerated Karen's rants, had had enough. After reviewing the repeated complaints and the clear evidence of harassment, they issued Karen an official warning. If she continued, she would face fines and possibly even legal removal from the community. For Karen, this was another devastating blow. The very association she used as her weapon had now turned against her. But here's the interesting thing about people like Karen. They rarely reflect on their mistakes. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" she asked, "How can I fight harder?" So she came up with her most outrageous idea yet. She decided to build a fence, an enormous, ugly fence, right along the edge of her property. She claimed it was for privacy, but everyone knew the truth. It was her way of lashing out, of trying to block her neighbor's barn from sight, while making the street look terrible. At first, she thought she had found a loophole, but once again, the rules caught up with her. The fence exceeded height limits set by the HOA. Worse, she hadn't bothered to get the required approvals. Within weeks, she received a notice to tear it down. Karen was furious. She ranted about freedom, about property rights, about being targeted unfairly. But no one was listening anymore. The neighborhood was tired. The HOA was strict, and the law was clear. Her fence had to go. One by one, her weapons disappeared. Her windows, gone. Her fence, gone. Her reputation, gone. And through it all, the barn stood tall. It became more than just a building. To the neighbors, it was a reminder that patience and persistence can outlast pettiness and cruelty. It was a symbol of resilience, a lesson that when you do things the right way, even the loudest complainers can't take it from you. Now, some people might wonder, did Karen ever change? Did she finally realize her mistakes? The honest answer is complicated. She grew quieter. Yes, the constant battles drained her energy. The community no longer feared her, and without an audience, her power shrank. Some say she eventually moved away, searching for another neighborhood where she could start fresh. Others say she stayed, bitter but defeated, her house now a silent shadow of what it once was. But the legacy of her fight remained. Neighbors remembered the drama for years. They told the story to newcomers, warning them about what happens when you let pride and spite control your life. Parents even used the tale as a lesson for their kids. Don't be like Karen. Respect others. Follow the rules and don't let anger guide your choices. And that's the truth at the heart of this story. It's not just about a barn or a view or a court case. It's about the choices we make when faced with things we don't like. Do we adapt, compromise, and move on? Or do we fight, claw, and destroy until we end up losing everything? Karen chose the second path, and it cost her dearly. So next time you feel tempted to fight over something small, ask yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth the stress, the conflict, and the possibility of losing more than you gain? Because in Karen's case, she fought for her view and lost her windows. She fought for control and lost her reputation. She fought to make others miserable and ended up miserable herself. The barn is still there. Karen's power is not. Backhand index pointing right if you enjoyed this story. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who loves tales of justice and karma. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life stories that prove one simple truth. In the end, fairness always wins.